Dark Shadows came along at a time where, even though the movies that were being made were taking a huge leap in sophistication. I mean, you think of the great films, The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde, and just the explosion of motion pictures in the '60s. Yet at the same time, these soap operas. Still had their organ music, still had, the black backdrops for, their sets. You'd see the banister shake as somebody went up the stairway. They weren't dealing with huge budgets. There was no time for rehearsal, or certainly very little time. Many of the shows were done live still at that point. And it was wild, flying by the seat of your pants kind of acting, I mean, and one of the good things that they did was they pulled very heavily from the theatrical world, especially the New York soaps, the East Coast soaps, pulled, amazing actors, and many of whom, went on to have incredible careers in film and television, but there was I think an astounding professionalism that went on. It's very easy to look back and kind of crack wise about the bloopers and the flubbed lines and the things that that went on that did get on the air simply because that's they had no choice. They had to put most of these mistakes on the air. But to look back at that time and think that this was some sort of fly by night production would be just absolutely wrong. These were people who were most of them at the top of their craft. You certainly had some new young ones who were learning to act in front of America. But when you think about Fred and his amazing theatrical background, and Grayson Hall coming from an Oscar nomination in The Night of the Iguana, you're Joan Bennett certainly in her great movie career. You're talking about some amazing people coming together to to do this show, and as a result, I think that there is just that an energy that you don't find in contemporary drama that's shot the way it is, and with scenes that last mere seconds. I mean, Dark Shadows was a show where the scenes went on for for quite some time, and most of the episodes didn't even have that many actors in them. I'm sure for financial reasons, but a lot of the episodes had maybe 4 or 5 actors tops, and this was kind of a style that the show maintained, whereas many of the other soaps at the time would have twice or 3 times that many characters coming and going in the course of an episode. So this there was a big load on relatively few people, and mistakes were absolutely made, but as a result also there was just a kinetic astoundingly energetic magic that happened on the show, and I think that only happens, when you've got no choice but to get out there in front of America and basically do it live. It wasn't until Passions came along, which was in 1999, that any daytime drama dared again to do what Dark Shadows had done back in the '60s, which was to have a overall supernatural style and tone. It was only about weird, wacky stuff. It wasn't mixing it with the more classic, serious kinds of storytelling like some of the soaps had done up to that point. Passions was, just completely devoted to the supernatural and the weird and the strange. Yes, the show had classic romantic couples, but they always seem to be caught up in the witches and the warlocks and the black spells and the trips to hell and the kind of things that the show has become, very, very famous for. People kind of thought, oh, well, this is really wildly different and innovative. But again, if you look back, Dark Shadows had done it many, many, many years earlier. And so much time has passed, and as I think is kind of, a typical sort of Hollywood thing, everybody thinks they're, reinventing the wheel when in fact, they're not. But it was, nevertheless, for Passions, it was quite a gamble that has paid off. I mean, it's now been on the air five years, and is, generally speaking, with the 18 to 34-year-old female viewer, runs number 2 right after Days of Our Lives, which is also a predominantly wild show. So that says certainly I think to the networks that this is very appealing. This has not worn out its welcome. Young viewers, certainly after having expressed, great devotion to, Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel and a number of other primetime shows, that the supernatural and the weird and the wacky is, absolutely what a good portion of the audience still wants to see. One of the interesting things about the end of Dark Shadows was that the show got back to almost, really where it began as much more of a classic, gothic, romantic kind of a show. After a time, the creators had, really pulled out just about every horror or sci-fi element that we classically know. I mean, there was a Frankensteinian kind of character, Adam and Eve actually, and with the werewolves and the time travel and parallel universes. And at one point, the show even went into the future for a little bit. It did run out of steam in terms of the supernatural aspects. It had pretty much all been done. And as a result of that, it interestingly got back full circle to, too much more of a romantic and classical sort of vein. I mean, still obviously had many of the characters that had been around throughout the run, and in some cases playing other characters, but it kind of did give up on the outrageous storytelling, and that's kind of interesting. That because shows don't tend to, come full circle like that. If they change their tone, they tend to either stay that way or pursue that creative line. Very interesting to kind of come back to where it started, and I think in some ways that was not satisfying, to a lot of the fan base, but nevertheless, it's very interesting to look creatively at the journey of the show. It's, again, one more very, very unique element of Dark Shadows. It's very easy to look back and think of Dark Shadows as being this, kind of cheap, flimsy production. It wasn't, not for its time. It was as sophisticated as any other daytime show on the air, and probably because of its requirements as far as scenic design and costuming was probably even a pricier show to do in certain respects. There were limitations, obviously. So many of the episodes, had just a small number of actors, 4 or 5, at the most, were in many of the episodes, whereas the other soaps at the time, would incorporate 10 or even, 15 characters. So it was on a smaller scale, but it was, hardly a cheapo production. Very easy, I think, to look back at the, the flubbed lines and the shaky banisters, when people walk up the stairways, or those things happen when you're doing live or next to live television. But it would, I think, be a mistake to look back at Dark Shadows and think that it wasn't absolutely first class in its genre.